Wow, you guys are a prompt group. I thought I'd have to quiet this room down. We're getting started here about a minute early. I've got a philosophy with the team: get started early, or finish on time. So good afternoon. Thank you all for being here, and welcome to our online audience. I'm Cody Lund, the Executive Director of the Boise Center in the Auditorium District. Your presence reflects our community's commitment to the greater Boise Auditorium District's future, and we thank you for being here today. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce the district board members that are in attendance today. If you'll please stand when I call your name. Kristen Muckow, our board chair. Chase Erkins, vice chair. Chase over here. TM, I believe, is hopping in online, so he should be on our online. And then I think Sophie's going to be in a few minutes late if she's not here already. So I think if she's here, we'll have her stand. And then Jim Walker, I know he's in the room as well. There we are. Okay, thank you, and please be seated. I'd also like to recognize Mayor McLean and the folks from City Council with us today. So if you guys would please stand and be recognized. Thank you for being here. As many of you are aware, the district promotes economic growth in the Boise area by developing and managing public gathering spaces that bring the greatest positive benefit to our community. Idaho statute authorizes us to build, operate, and manage auditoriums, exhibit halls, convention centers, sports arenas, and similar facilities. In recent years, several parties have expressed interest in our prospective projects. In April of 2024, our board created an exploratory committee to evaluate potential investment opportunities. To better understand these opportunities, whether it's by expanding the existing facilities or developing new spaces, we commissioned a market feasibility study from Johnson Consulting this spring. Johnson Consulting engaged stakeholders, many of whom are in this room, analyzed our community's amenities and economic conditions, and compared our facilities to those in similar communities. We directed them to evaluate 5 statutorily allowable scenarios, one of them being a convention center expansion, a potential sister facility, a multi-sports center, a hybrid sports and event center, and a performing arts center. So a couple of those could be hybrid. We've established a web page on our district website called The Future of the District with a full study uploaded on that website. We've got meeting recordings, a timeline, and some FAQs. So please, if you're curious about where the district is going in the future, reference that part of the website. You can access it through the QR code on your tables today. So just take a look at those and use those to your advantage. Johnson Consulting is a consulting firm out of Chicago specializing in strategic planning for public assembly facilities, hospitality, and real estate. They presented to our board this last month in September, and today they're going to walk us through their process and the findings of that report. We'll have ample time for questions afterwards, so we please ask that you save those until the end. So first of all, I just will say thank you to Johnson Consulting and to Ryan and John for their efforts in completing the study and for the informative presentation to our board last month and also about what we're about to see today. We'll pause for a couple minutes after the end of this to just do some Q&A, and then we want to reset the stage, so we'll do that once we're done with Johnson's report here today. So please help me welcoming John Fleming from Johnson Consulting.
Thank you, Cody. Once again, John Fleming. I'm a project manager with Johnson Consulting, and as Cody mentioned, we're here today to really publicly present our findings from our market and feasibility study for the greater Boise Auditorium District. So, getting underway, just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of our agenda for this presentation. We'll be starting with a little bit of an introduction of our process, talking about kind of the key highlights of the presentation, and then diving deeper into the current conditions at Boise Center, some key market factors that we saw from our economic and demographic analysis, some key findings from our benchmarking analysis, and then getting into our assessment of feasibility and our recommendations relative to the product opportunities that Cody mentioned, talking about some of our projections and economic impact estimates for these opportunities going forward, and then finally getting into some next steps for the Auditorium District as it looks to pursue these. And then at the end, there will be a Q&A phase where you'll have opportunities to ask us any questions about our report or our work. So starting with that introduction and executive summary, really the goals of the project were twofold. On a micro level, we were looking at Boise Center specifically, Boise Center being the Auditorium District's most significant asset, and understanding opportunities around physical changes, physical reorientation of the center spaces, as well as potential expansion. But we were also simultaneously looking at other facility opportunities within the Auditorium District and within the market. So thinking about a sister events facility, a multi-purpose sports facility, as Cody referenced, maybe a performing arts facility as well. So thinking about these all in tandem and trying to understand what are the best opportunities for the auditorium district going forward? This study process really had 3 phases. The first was a research phase where we looked at sort of a market analysis and historical operations analysis. We did quite a bit of stakeholder engagement, speaking to 35 different stakeholder groups from across the community and across different sectors of the community. Industry trends as well, making sure that best practices were incorporated into all of our analysis and research. And then looking at some benchmarking and case studies of comparable markets and how those compare to Boise in terms of economic and demographic factors, as well as facility inventory. That all flowed into a set of strategic recommendations and an assessment of feasibility of these different opportunities. And then based on those recommendations and the feasibility assessment, developed some demand and financial projections, as well as economic and fiscal impact analysis for the recommended products. And to give you a little bit of a summary of our key findings here, I think the first and foremost is, in terms of current conditions, Boise Center is really at capacity today. This facility is extremely successful. It's very high performing, especially relative to some of its benchmarks, but it's limited in terms of date availability. It's hard to find dates in here for events, as many of you know from trying to book your own events in here. It's limited by its size as well. It doesn't have a traditional exhibit hall, so its largest space is about 26,000 square feet. And that's pretty small relative to convention centers within its benchmarking cohort, as we'll get into. Simultaneously, however, the market within Boise and within the greater Boise and Treasure Valley area is very strong. As you all know, you've seen tremendous population and wealth growth in this community in recent years. You've seen a strong economy, strong levels of educational attainment. And so that really highlights, some of the facility gaps. On the one hand, the market is on a growth trajectory, and on the other hand, you're sort of missing some of the facilities that similar markets, similarly positioned markets have in terms of exhibit space in your convention center, in terms of that indoor sports complex type facility that allows to take advantage of some of those sports tourism tournament opportunities. And then a civic performing arts center, I think, is another significant facility gap that we identified. And so, really what we saw as the outcome here is some opportunities for the auditorium district to make some strategic investments. So thinking about additional convention space, potentially in the form of an expansion of Boise Center, as well as an indoor sports and a multipurpose facility as being, really the 2 key opportunities, and we'll get into why in a little bit. So starting by diving a little bit further into current conditions at Boise Center, I think something that's really important to understand is that the center has seen a shifting operational strategy in recent years, and this has been at the directive of the board, but the success metric for the center has shifted from, previously it was more about total utilization, how many events can we bring into this facility, make sure it's busy all the time, to, keeping it busy, and it is still very busy, but focusing on events that maximize revenue and maximize economic impact for the Boise community. And so when you see a drop from about 350 to 340 events prior to COVID to where things are today, 262 events in fiscal year 24, the reality is that that's been an intentional shift of what kind of events are being prioritized within Boise Center's calendar. Now, this is reflected by the sort of a shift in terms of room night generation, which has become one of the center's more significant success metrics in recent years. And what you see is that, the refocus in terms of operational strategy has led to a 50% uptick in room nights from before COVID to where we are today. That's tremendous growth, and I think reflective of the excellent operation that we see going on at Boise Center. With that said, the center and really this facility has some limitations. And I think the most significant constraint that we're seeing in terms of lost business data is data availability. Data availability alone accounted for 124 lost events in fiscal year 2024. So that's 124 events that wanted to use Boise Center but weren't able to because the dates simply weren't there. And I think that speaks to the amount of business that's being turned away, the amount of opportunity cost that is being borne by this community without additional event space available within its convention center. Simultaneously, we're seeing some other limitations, facility size being a significant one, and particularly if you look at convention and conference type events, which are the most significant in terms of out-of-town business, room night generation, and economic impact, facility size is a real limiter. Again, a 26,000 square foot ballroom being your largest contiguous space is really pretty small relative to some of the benchmarks and relative to what you would see typically for a community of Boise's size. Hotel inventory is also somewhat of a significant limiter, not in that the hotel inventory is poor, but just in that there's maybe not enough of it, and there's some challenges with cost and occupancy, as we'll get into in a little bit. And then wanted to talk a little bit about some key market factors within the greater Boise market. And again, really strong market fundamentals. We're seeing a rapidly growing population, not just historically, but projected going forward, extremely high levels of educational attainment, and a stable economic base that sort of combines components of tech, with Micron and their developments, obviously government with the state of Idaho being here, education, healthcare. There are a lot of different drivers that build a very strong and very well-diversified economy. That said, again, there's some pretty significant facility gaps, thinking about the exhibit hall challenge at Boise Center and just the facility's overall undersized nature relative to the market size. Simultaneously, and not unrelatedly, there's somewhat limited local event space in general, and I think that speaks to a lot of that turned away business. A lot of folks are trying to have their events locally. They're reaching out to Boise Center. Boise Center is trying to accommodate as best they can, but the reality is there's only so many days on the calendar, right? And there aren't too many other places within the community where these events can go. And so I think that's certainly a challenge. There isn't really an indoor sports complex. There's the Kevin Williams complex at Boise State, and that served as a location for some indoor sports tournaments, but the reality is that's a BSU facility and it's intended for BSU students, and so any sort of sports tournament travel is a secondary use, and that's very understandable. And then performing arts space is challenging as well. Historically, the symphony and the opera and the ballet have used the Morrison Center, and that's been a great facility, but the Morrison Center's priorities have been shifting in recent years, along with Boise State's in general, and the reality is that these groups are sort of looking for different opportunities in terms of more of a dedicated space that can serve their expanding needs while the Morrison Center serves its own needs. And then the other piece I wanted to highlight is the hotel market. You're seeing, especially downtown, extremely strong occupancies and average daily rates, and so that's your hotel nightly rate. And if we look at our benchmarking analysis, these occupancies and rates are comparable and even in excess of what you're seeing in downtown Salt Lake City. So consider how far Boise has come, that its hotel market in some ways is comped to such a powerful market as Salt Lake City, right? The challenge and the flip side of that is that downtown inventory is a little bit limited relative to these benchmarks, and we'll get into that in a moment. But we do want to acknowledge that the AC Element Hotel that's currently under construction and projected to open in 2026 is going to help that. And so that's certainly been acknowledged and thought through within our process. Another key component of our analysis process was a benchmarking analysis. And so we really looked at 4 primary benchmark markets, as well as the facilities within those markets. We looked at Spokane, Washington, Salt Lake City, Utah, Des Moines, Iowa, and Madison, Wisconsin. Why did we pick these markets? Well, in the case of Spokane, it's probably the most directly competitive with Boise location-wise in terms of where you see conventions looking at. They look at Spokane, they look at Boise, they're similarly sized. And within that market, you have the Spokane Convention Center and the podium is really primary assets that we studied. Salt Lake City, it's quite a bit larger, although less big than you would expect relative to Boise, and I think that's something that really needs to be acknowledged and thought through, and we get into that quite a bit in our report. But they have an excellent facility inventory in that community, and also pretty locationally relevant. It's also a state capital, which is something that we wanted to consider, and certainly factored into our choices of Des Moines, Iowa, and Madison, Wisconsin, 2 of the faster growing communities in the United States. Madison also has University of Wisconsin-Madison fairly close to their downtown, so another strong parallel to Boise in that respect. What were some of our key observations from this benchmarking analysis? Well, I think number 1 is that Boise compares extremely favorably to these other markets in terms of size, in terms of wealth, and in terms of growth trajectory. And growth trajectory, I think, is particularly important as Boise is outpacing these communities in terms of expected growth by quite a bit. And that really speaks to this community's strength and this community's opportunity. The flip side of that is if we look at these different sort of facility inventories within the community, what we're seeing is Boise is pretty significantly undersupplied in terms of convention space, as well as in terms of indoor sports space. It's the only of the 4 markets that doesn't have a dedicated indoor sports complex. It's the only of the 4 markets whose convention center does not have an exhibit hall, right? And so that's a clear gap, and I think something that is pretty glaring to us in terms of opportunities for the district to make strategic investments going forward. Boise's hotel market, again, is performing very well, specifically within the downtown sector, but it has among the least inventory proximate to its convention center of any of these facilities. And so just keeping that in mind, thinking about if a convention center expansion were to happen, how would that impact the hotel market, and want to be very cognizant of that. Simultaneously, sort of the high occupancy rate as well as the average daily rates in the downtown can be a little bit challenging for conventions. They indicate the strong performance of the Boise market, but a lot of that performance is also tied to corporate travel, leisure travel, right? And so, wanting to make sure that there's still a role for conventions and that the hotel supply isn't cost prohibitive for convention attendees is really important for the district going forward. Then the last thing I want to note on this benchmarking analysis is we looked at airlift and airport direct flights as well as annual employments. And what we found is, with the exception of Salt Lake City, which it's a Delta hub, it's a little bit of a different beast, right? Airlift is very comparable to benchmarks. Boise has essentially the same number of direct flights and actually more employments than any of the other three benchmarks. I think the biggest challenge, specifically relative to markets like Des Moines and Madison, is East Coast access. As you may know, the Boise airport only has one direct flight to the East Coast. It goes to Atlanta. Now, the city of Boise has been doing some really great work in upgrading the airport, working on getting more flight routes. So that's moving in the right direction, but it's something that's currently somewhat of a limiting condition in terms of attracting these nationwide conventions, is how can we get to Boise? So all of those factors really played into our assessment of feasibility for the different product opportunities that we referenced, as well as a set of recommendations for those product opportunities vis-a-vis the auditorium district. And so I think the really big takeaway is that all of these products that we looked at are feasible within the market. The growing Boise market is supportive of additional convention space, event space, local use event space as well. A multi-purpose sports complex would certainly make sense. Performing Arts Center, there's a strong need for these groups to have a home. There's a strong demand among the community to utilize this facility. And then we also looked at sort of an event space near the baseball stadium in Garden City, sort of paired with a baseball stadium redevelopment, and that could really work as well. The thing that we wanted to make sure to emphasize, however, is that not all of these projects are necessarily going to be top priority in terms of making sense for the auditorium district. And the reason for that is that the auditorium district has a really strong asset in Boise Center, and it also has a need to generate room nights in order to make sure it's financially sustainable. So investing significant resources into products that aren't going to be synergistic with its existing asset, or products that aren't going to help ensure its own financial sustainability, is not necessarily recommended. So that's really what drove some of the recommendations in terms of the partnership with GBAD. Now, that's not to say that the auditorium district couldn't participate in any of these other projects, just that it might not be the primary funder or the primary leader of such a project. So getting into these a little bit more specifically, I think the two really key opportunities that we would recommend the auditorium district move forward with would be the convention space expansion at Boise Center, as well as an indoor sports complex to support more sports tourism within the community. And so, looking at what we'd recommend for Boise Center, we see adding an exhibit hall in the 100,000 square foot range would bring this into the size range of the Spokane Convention Center and make Boise much more competitive for these larger conventions. And I'll note that Boise is already highly competitive because of the strong downtown environment, because of the hospitality that folks have when they come into this downtown and getting to experience the shopping and dining and so forth. And so having a facility to support that, in our opinion, is going to be the cherry on top and really be a force multiplier to bring quite a bit more tourism into the community. What this does really is three things primarily. One is creating additional date availability. Now, you might say you're not expanding the day or the year, it's still 365 days, but what additional space in the convention center does, and we've seen this already with Boise Center East, is it allows for more modules of space for simultaneous event hosting. Now, you can only push that so far, but it does help with that date availability equation. I think the really key one, however, is enabling larger events in general. So not only are you enabling a greater volume of events, but the most significant limiting factor on how large of a convention can you hold in the convention center is how large is this biggest space? How big is that expo hall where you can have your general session? So going from a largest space of about 26,000 square feet to a largest space of 100,000 square feet is a tremendous difference and is going to completely open up the world of events that Boise Center could host. The third real key thing is that those largest events are the highest impact in terms of room nights, in terms of visitor spending. Those are the events where you're bringing in folks from all over the country. They're staying in hotels for 1, 2, 3 nights at a time. They're spending at local restaurants and generating economic impact. So we really see this as a really critical opportunity for the Boise community. The other one we wanted to highlight in terms of key opportunities is that multi-purpose indoor sports complex. And so, to enter the market in this respect, we would recommend that the community goes fairly large in terms of a size, looking at a facility that could hold about 10 simultaneously operating basketball courts or 20 volleyball courts. Those can be converted one to the other. That kind of hall size is typically about 100,000 square feet, looking at some breakout spaces of about 10,000 square feet. And you'll note that that 100,000 square feet is the same size as we recommended for the exhibit hall at Boise Center. There could certainly be a world, and this is really where the next process phase will address this, but thinking about how can we combine these opportunities, and is there an opportunity for the convention center to at least partially serve that sports tournament need in the near future, right? Again, 3 opportunities that this really helps develop for the community. One is allowing Boise to compete in that sports tourism market to a much greater degree than it has historically, right? Being that facility that brings in those large tournaments, brings in those 10, 20, 30, 50 team tournaments, right? Driving more weekend visitation. I think something we've observed from our analysis is that you have great weeknight occupancy at your hotels. You have a lot of business travel, a lot of convention travel, but the weekends are maybe a little bit softer. That's when these sports complexes really thrive in terms of bringing folks into the community, right? And then, the flexibility of a building like this is really powerful. And so there's opportunities for use beyond sports tournaments, local use, consumer shows, expos, even community use for things like disaster relief or staging, right? These buildings are extremely valuable, and it's important to have them in a community like Boise. Local event space, in our opinion, is viable, but maybe a little bit of a lower priority. So, we would recommend something in the 30,000 square foot range for a ballroom with some support spaces of about 5,000 square feet. And I think the primary reason that this would be an important opportunity for the auditorium district is, creating some of that additional data availability. So looking at it as a release valve for the Boise Center's calendar as it stands today, and being able to say, hey, some of these events, these 124 events, I know we can't accommodate you in Boise Center, but we have this other facility, maybe you can fit into there. How can we make that calendar work, right? Supporting local community use has long been a goal of the auditorium district. So even if it's not room night centric, it's still extremely valuable. It's important to have spaces to host these events, and I think that's something that strategically the district has long been committed to. And then there's even a possibility for some positive revenue. Now, I would say that we looked at this opportunity in some different areas, and those site analysis was not a huge part of our scope. We did consider the proposal of a local sort of event space associated with a ballpark redevelopment for the Boise Hawks. And that could fill the event space need, and I think would be a really strong opportunity. I think the challenge from our perspective and from the auditorium district's perspective is that it's a little bit less synergistic with existing assets. In terms of Boise Center, it's not as proximate. It's not as proximate to your downtown environment and the hotels and the restaurants and sort of the assets that you've built up down here. And so, it may not be the most optimal situation, but that's not to say that it couldn't work and shouldn't be explored further. And then a civic performing arts center, in our opinion, is critically needed by the community. We see these arts organizations growing their programming, growing their calendar, growing their attendance, and maybe not necessarily having a home that's fully supportive of everything that they want to do in terms of performances, in terms of education, rehearsals, et cetera. At the same time, it's a little bit challenging for the auditorium district from a financial sustainability perspective to be the leader in such an investment. A couple of reasons for that. One is these facilities are extremely expensive. Performing arts space is going for upwards of $1,000 per square foot in a lot of cases. So that's one challenge. The other side of it is that Oftentimes, the room night generation on a facility like this, in terms of hotel room nights, though significant, is limited, at least relative to a convention center, right? And so if we're thinking about prioritizing a limited pool of resources, it maybe slips a little bit down the list. But that's just for the auditorium district, and that's not to say that it's not a viable and valuable opportunity for the community. And something that I think is key to point out is that the auditorium district isn't necessarily not a part of such a project, but it has to be a smaller part of such a project. And something we do see often with performing arts projects is significant philanthropic support, donor support, naming rights, the business community stepping in as well. So those are other ways that you can fill up that kind of capital stack. That's not just all the auditorium district's funding. The other thing that I want to note here, and I know I'm a little bit long, so we'll keep it moving, but with these facilities, we're seeing hybrid performance hall and ballroom opportunities being developed. There's technology that can convert a ballroom into a perfectly high quality performance hall with fixed seating and very traditional acoustics, et cetera. And we've seen this at major facilities across the United States. So that may be a strong opportunity, as this is explored further, both to maximize utilization, maximize revenue, bring in funding partners, and also solve some of that local event space need in tandem with that performing arts space need. So lastly, we developed a set of projections in terms of demand and economic and fiscal impacts for the two primary opportunities that we recommended as an outcome of our study. So starting with the Boise Center, I think really pretty significant event and attendance growth would be expected for an expanded Boise Center. Going from about 260 events annually now to about 360 upon stabilization. And when I say stabilization, that's really when the new and expanded facility is fully absorbed into the market. And in terms of attendance, you'd be going from about 150,000 today to over 320,000 upon that stabilization. So really significant growth. And you'll notice the event growth is not proportionate with the attendance growth. The reason for that is you're looking at much larger events. Again, with that exhibit hall, with that expanded capacity, suddenly you're bringing in much more major conventions that drive that attendance higher than you might expect just based on purely event growth. Thinking about the sports complex, looking at stabilization around 113 annual events, and the majority of that being driven by regional tournaments. So again, the goal of such a facility being to promote sports tourism, get basketball, volleyball, wrestling, cheer, et cetera, tournaments into the facility, get them there for multiple days over the course of a weekend, and drive those room nights, drive that economic impact. Likewise, with attendance, you would see the majority of that attendance coming from those tournaments, and again, stabilizing at about 104,000 total attendees on an annual basis per our model. In terms of economic impact, with this expansion, we would see an expectation of about 123% economic impact growth over current levels by stabilization. So really, really significant growth over what Boise Center is able to do today for the local economy to what they could do with this facility expansion. In terms of room nights, going from about 34,000 today, and that's what was reported in fiscal year 24, to over 75,000 in year 5. So again, really tremendous growth and a lot greater impact opportunity for the community. In total, looking at about $185 million of stabilized economic impact in year 5, $7.2 million of fiscal impact, that's tax revenues to local as well as state jurisdictions, and over 1,000 full-time equivalent jobs sustained on an annual basis. And then looking at the sports complex, a lower scale of impact, but still extremely valuable, about $39 million on an annual basis in terms of economic impact. In terms of fiscal impact, about $1.6 million in tax revenues, and then just over 213 jobs sustained. So still extremely significant and still extremely valuable for the local economy. Lastly, just want to touch on some next steps as we think about, how does this project progress? How do these opportunities progress for the auditorium district? And we thought of it really in 3 primary phases. The first phase is diving a little bit deeper into the opportunities that we've recommended. Our scope and our role was to really study the market and identify what is feasible and what is recommended for the auditorium district. But from there, you have to start studying these things a little bit more specifically, understanding site opportunities, understanding preliminary design. How are we actually going to bring these into implementation? What is the funding structure, et cetera? That all drives into a second phase, assuming viability from a funding perspective, from a site perspective, beginning to design and construct these opportunities. And, whether it's both, whether it's one, and whether it's a hybrid, determining that as we move forward. And then the third phase is, as those products are absorbed into the market and as they begin to stabilize, start to reevaluate, at this stage, what is the need for local event space? Has a civic performing arts facility emerged? And if not, is there an opportunity for that to be, the next project for the auditorium district? So it's always important to continually reevaluate a market and understand, what are the current needs? These feasibility studies are extremely valuable, but they need to be updated because, as you know, Boise is changing and growing every single day. Last slide here, I promise, just a couple of key considerations as we think about these product opportunities going forward. One is thinking about site, and this was, again, not part of our initial scope, but it's going to become very important as we go forward. For the convention space, we think downtown is really key. We think of this as one of the better convention districts in terms of a package of quality hotels, unique and quality restaurants, walkability, and safety in the United States. And so looking at if it's an opportunity to expand Boise Center or somehow keep this convention space proximate to Boise Center and proximate to downtown, that's really what we prefer. The indoor sports facility could be outside of downtown. It's not as critical to pair with those assets. It's a little bit of a different demographic. It's a little bit of a different type of use, but nearby is preferred from our perspective because we still want to drive business to this district of Boise and continue multiplying all of the activity that's going down here. Funding, both of these product opportunities, and I think that's really key to understand, will require funding in excess of the auditorium district's current cash on hand. So in any case, we're going to be looking at a creative capital stack. It's not just going to be the auditorium district writes a check, hires a contractor, and builds it. It is going to be looking at partnerships. It's going to be looking at bonding opportunities, et cetera. And so that's really a key part of our the next phase of work for the auditorium district is how do we carefully plan this capital stack so that it's financially sustainable and so that it delivers the product that they need to continue advancing the community forward. So with that, we're going to reset the stage here and get into some Q&A, and thank you all for your time.
Okay, as we get ready to kind of take some Q&A, I'm not sure if there's anything that we need to do to the stage. If there is, we can pull the podium off. Otherwise, we're happy just to take some questions. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Ryan and John for their efforts to complete the study and for the informative presentation. Again, I want to say just thank you to everybody for making it here today. And then joining me on stage for Q&A is our District Board Chair, Kristen Muckow. Again, Cody Lund from the Auditorium District and Boise Center Executive Director. And then Ryan Johnson and John Fleming, both with Johnson Consulting. We're just asking to ask a question. Please use one of the microphones that are here at the front of the room. And then once at the mic, state your name, organization, and your question. We're asking that people limit to just one question for now so we can give everybody a chance to at least ask some questions. And then any of the online attendees, please submit your questions via the chat. And the session moderator, Mary Michael, thank you for handling that in the back of the room. We'll bring them to the stage and we'll answer those as well. So at this point, we'll open up to Q&A. And again, we'll kind of field it sort of like a panel discussion at this point in time. If it's something very specific to the district and the board, that'll probably be Kristen. Operationally, I'll handle that from the Boise Center side. And then anything from the study findings, we'll have you guys ask of Johnson Consulting. And might be a hybrid answer in some of those cases. So give them a couple minutes here just to get that off so we can get it out of the view. We can see our people.
Hi, I am Clay Carley. I'm a local downtown developer, so downtown is deep and near and dear to my heart. So I had a couple of comments and then a question to go with that. So as every region goes, it goes according to the health of its downtown. So one, I certainly hope that you focus and maintain whatever you do downtown. Two, I think there's two issues here. One is you need to expand your facility. That's very understandable because you want to meet the market need based on our growth. But it's going to take a lot more money than you have. And I think fundraising privately for just a convention center is going to be a real challenge. We need a performing arts center. So I would ask that you look very deeply at the combination of the two. There is a property I know that's available, could be available with the right use and funding. That's about 4 acres, 3 blocks from here. And I hope and think that it might be able to meet both of those uses I understand it's going to cost more money to build that. Performing arts is a lot more expensive. But with the number of arts organizations we have and the generosity of our community, that's going to make for a much more powerful fundraising effort than just a convention center by itself. So I would ask you all, what do you think of that as a focus effort in your study, and not just one convention center versus a sports facility, but that hybrid use of performing arts and convention?
I'll tackle that, and then if Kristen, you'd like to jump in. But yes, no, you're hitting on many of the things. That was really why we asked Johnson to do it in this way, particular in this order, was to look at the market opportunities first, and then how to execute on those opportunities as next is really the goal of the district board in updating their strategic plan. And that's part of why we've created that kind of the future of the district page. There's opportunity on there to fill out a form, questions of the district, feedback, the engagement process. We engaged over 35 different stakeholders through this and heard a lot of the same comments that you made just today. So I want to make sure that we're exploring all of our opportunities, and it really is that kind of mix of finding out financially, we want to protect the district and be able to do the great things that it's currently doing with Boise Center's assets and not sacrifice any of those. These buildings do need subsidized, convention centers included, and so that's where it's an important part of the mix as we look forward at the trajectory. Now, I can tell you that we're sitting on about $30 million in cash reserves right now. That's not enough, as Johnson highlighted, to build any one of these product opportunities. In the case of Boise Center East, we used a combination of cash on hand and bonding ability to pay for Boise Center East. We still have a debt service payment of about $1.7 million on the building that we're in today. So those things need to be taken into consideration as you're looking at cash flows for whatever we build, that we don't hurt what the current assets are or the operations of those assets. But all those opportunities, I've been very clear and want to make sure it's said today that we aren't cherry picking one particular project opportunity or type. It's just looking at the data, and then I'm very much a data-driven decision guy, and so that's what I wanted to give our board, was more information, updated. The last study we did was really in 2012. A lot's changed in Boise, as you can imagine, and again, these product opportunities are all feasible. It's just the right order and who are the funders of them. And again, if there is philanthropy, if there's other partners in that, I think that would then be an important piece for the board to consider a project. Anything you want to?
I think from the board's perspective is the more multi-use that a facility can be is the better. If we can, kill two birds with one stone, great. And I think that, we're going to just kind of shake the trees and see what falls out. I'm not sure what land you're speaking of, but I see Chase over there, so he probably knows. And then I know Eric is back there, so he can talk about funding if we need to. So we've got, our resources here that we're going to continue to kind of evaluate those processes. But I would say, gosh, the more multi-use a facility can be, the better for everybody.
Nothing on my end other than to say that, we do see convention centers with a performing arts component very frequently. We've worked on these types of facilities, and they can often be very synergistic in terms of even the performing arts center having a role to play within a conventions program of spaces and a conventions program of uses. So, certainly something good to consider. And as Cody mentioned, we were trying to understand the market opportunity for all of these, but as the district moves forward, it's going to be about now how do we actually execute on these, and that's certainly a strong, viable option, I should say.
Any other questions? We've got some time built into the Q&A part, so I'm really hoping we get some Q&As.
Hi, I'm Marty Jacobs, community member for the past 8 years. When I moved here from New York City, been involved in a lot of civic and governmental and cultural activities, including the Neighborhood Association, president of the Philharmonic Board. I currently sit as a commissioner for the City of Boise Ada County Housing Authority, and I'm also interested in this project very, very strongly. I totally support the concept of a combined performing arts center as well as a convention center. I think it's important to note that for the first time, the professional arts organization in Boise are in alignment on the need for such a venue. Also, it's important to keep in mind that the calendar itself is filled with less than 50% use for the Performing Arts Center. So any multi-purpose facility for a convention center and the arts center would have the lion's share of the time available for community needs. So it isn't all or nothing. I think you addressed the issue of a multi-purpose facility that can accommodate convention centers. I saw several of them around the country, including the latest one in New York City, that the walls go left to right and up and down, and the seats move around. Beautiful facility. The other piece, I'd like you guys to weigh in on it as well, is that the land that Clay mentioned, the owners of the land made it contingent upon a performing arts center being part of it, that they're willing to come to some agreement if it's for the performing arts, if it has a component. And finally, in terms of monetizing it, there are local corporations, sponsors, donors, community leaders who's more than willing to write a check to help monetize this. Something that if it's an exclusive corporate entity, I think they'll be difficult to get. And I just would like you to weigh in on that component.
Yeah, I'll speak to briefly just an answer on that. I will echo what I've seen through the stakeholder engagement. The performing arts community is very much in alignment right now, and I saw that clearly through the conversations we had. That's been unique compared to my experience. I've been with the Convention Center for 20 years. I'm a lifelong resident, born and raised. So to see that much synergy happening with the performing arts community is different, and it's also a really cool time and an opportunity I think that can be capitalized on. You're absolutely right. The ability, and as Kristen said, the hybrid components of that could be very successful. I was not aware of the percentage of how many dates would be available. I think things that the district needs to make sure we're considering. But again, this is where some of that, the programming of that kind of space might be more local in nature, just because as you're working on convention bookings, a lot of those conventions are booking 2 to 4 years out. So as you're looking at date availability for use of a performing arts venue, you don't want to step on top of those. That the intent is to be built to give them a house or a place to be able to have dates available. I think those are some of the challenges that working with the auditorium district we would need to overcome. But at the end of the day, I think it's all something that is a really great opportunity, and I want to make sure we explore it. And then the component of this is the Morrison Center obviously being built through philanthropy dollars as well, or at least helped in that way. Those are opportunities that I think really incentivize somebody like the auditorium district to consider those type of projects a little bit closer.
And just one final, or not final thought, but you know, as you think about the program for the convention center that we've identified, there's also a new 40,000 square foot ballroom that's part of that. So there could be some opportunities for performing arts utilization and configuration. So as Cody mentioned, you know, we really are early on in this process. So there's a lot of opportunity as we get further into the program refinement and development to think about just, you know, that kind of scenario. So just wanted to share that.
Hey, thank you so much for allowing the public input here. I didn't so much have a question, but just wanted to kind of make a plea to the board, if I could. I'm Meredith Stead with the Boise City Council. The district has played a vital role in Boise's identity. Under Idaho Code Title 67, Chapter 49, you're empowered not just to build auditoriums or convention centers, but to invest in the kind of community infrastructure that promotes the prosperity, security, and general welfare of the people who live here. That's the heart of your purpose, and the purpose is deeply connected to the place. Right now, we have an extraordinary opportunity to keep that purpose alive downtown. As you consider your next project, I urge you to invest in a facility that truly serves the people of the district, a performing arts space and a banquet space that local groups can use to support their own causes. Johnson Consultants' report has already made it clear our local performing arts, nonprofit, and small business communities need this kind of space. They need affordability, accessible venues to gather, to perform, to innovate, to host events, and to celebrate. Spaces that help them sustain their missions and fuel creativity. Tourism infrastructure matters in our economy. Visitors bringing energy and spending to Boise, but when that investment is aligned with local needs, it multiplies its impact. A downtown performing arts or community event space draws visitors and strengths and to the heartbeat of our city. It gives local organizations, from youth art programs to startups to service groups, a place to thrive. Downtown Boise has always been a cultural and community center in its region. Let's keep it that way. Let's ensure that as we build for visitors, we're also building for residents, for the people whose creativity, volunteerism, and entrepreneurship makes this place special in the first place. By investing downtown in a space that welcomes the community and celebrates our shared culture, you can fulfill both the letter of this and the spirit of your mandate, promoting the general welfare of the district while advancing economic vitality. Thank you for your leadership. This is a really exciting opportunity. I know we're all eager to hear what direction it goes. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for those comments.
Good afternoon. My name is Jared Smith. I'm the owner of the Residence Inn, just a couple blocks away, and also the one crazy enough to build another 300 rooms a couple blocks away. Our company is in 4 states. So first off, I want to thank the board. I really appreciate the transparency, appreciate you, Cody, and also the consultants. 10 years ago, it wasn't as transparent, and we appreciate it. I watched your entire presentation and read your whole plan, so thank you. I want to give you a little bit of a hotelier's perspective. It's all, and congratulations for what you've done, but I just want to give you a little bit of our perspective. So our hotel comp set is about 9 hotels in the downtown core, roughly about 1,400 hotels. We collect $4 million of taxes in those 9 hotels on your behalf. So about a third of the revenue coming in for the district is coming into those 9 hotels. So just the point that this is very downtown centric. We hope that it stays in the downtown, whatever the proposal may be. So I have 3 quick points. I don't think I need to dwell on them, but the first, as we all know, the charter does not allow the money to be used for hotels. I appreciate that it wasn't one of your proposals here, but we just want to make sure we're understanding that in many other jurisdictions in states, it is permitted. It's not permitted in the charter in Idaho. You also referenced some of the numbers as far as hotel space. We would love to see more hotel rooms if it's done by the private sector. So just in the last 8 years, 62% of the hotels in downtown, 1,400 of them, 1,000 rooms of your 1,500 that are in your 15-minute walkable area are new, and they've been built. So the private sector is responding. We'll bring them as needed. Please just don't put, the weight of government on the scale as we make these decisions. So we appreciate that. Also, you referenced the higher RevPAR, the revenue per average room in our market. Going back to the same point that 62% of these hotels have been built just in the last couple of years, it takes a much higher RevPAR to survive when you build it at numbers that are today. So, for example, our Residence Inn built 8 years ago. I won't tell you what it cost to build, but it would cost twice as much today as we know what we're building next door. So when compared to Spokane and some of these other markets, I totally agree with the analysis and what you did, but you've got to understand that we have a much smaller size growing, again, more than doubled in size, and with our hotel coming, another 20% growth. So the growth is coming. So with all that said, I also have 6 children, and I've spent at least half my life in gyms as all of them compete, across. And I've been to all the major cities in the Northwest. I've always wondered why we don't have a sports facility in downtown Boise. Just so you know, the revenue of our hotel drops by 33% on the weekends. I think you saw it in your analysis as well. Our revenue per average room does exceedingly well during the week. Our weekends stink. There's no other way to put it. We need to fill our hotel rooms, and we would love something that brings people to Boise. And let's be honest, this is a great city to walk around in on the weekends. So again, thank you to the board, to Cody, and to the consultants. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for those comments. And what I'm hearing from this, and I'll just kind of add a little context to this as we continue to look at these product opportunities, Boise's behind in infrastructure. So again, we're playing catch up in several different buckets here. And so I think it takes a community of this size and of this much, the people that the turnout here today proves to me that we have some civic-minded individuals in our city, and I know that just by working with individuals as I've met with them through this process. I want to get creative. I don't want to not look at anything as a priority or not a priority. I want to look at, can we walk and chew bubble gum at the same time, meaning maybe there's an opportunity to solve multiple needs in a phased out approach. Now, again, the limited resources of the district only allow us to do so much as a district and an auditorium district. So protecting the current assets, continuing to be successful is going to be a priority of mine and the board, I believe, going forward regardless. But the opportunity to look at multiple projects at once is something that doesn't scare me off. And actually, I think our community needs to be aggressive in trying to catch up to some of the product opportunities that other markets of other comp sizes have. So.
Jay Story with Story Commercial brokerage here in town. Love the idea of the hybrid concepts. I'm curious, and I appreciate that you were saying that we should leverage the current assets, and if we did a big exhibition hall of 100,000 square feet, or give or take, that's 2.5 acres, and we're downtown. Can you speak a little bit to how close does it need to be to the mothership, and how do you work with connectivity? Have you seen that in other communities? How do we make it effective?
You want me to?
I'm good with either way. I think there's a double answer here.
Yeah, so I'll start then. So there is very limited land available downtown, so this is a large project. So You know, we did a lot of work on the Moscone Center, which is in San Francisco. Massive city, massive building, you know, totally different proposition. But, you know, you can either go up above to get this type of, you know, scale of facility that we're talking about, or underground, or acquiring sites around the convention center. Those are really the three options you have for an expansion. So it is possible. We've seen it done in other markets. It really comes down to the cost and the value proposition. So I think, you know, from our preference and from an event planner preference, staying as close and proximate to the Boise Center is absolutely a priority. You move further away from the downtown, you lose a lot of that walkability. And another point, you know, to the expansion capabilities, you know, it's really important, you know, I think for the exhibit hall, you know, that is the biggest deficiency that we've seen. So that 100,000, you know, as you think about, you know, sites are going up or down, you know, really we see that as almost a minimum size requirement. So you might have to break that up into a couple different exhibit halls, but, you know, the more contiguous in that size is really a critical focus for us as you all move forward.
Yeah, and so again, I'll just speak from the operations side. From a convention space, having an exhibit hall space and detached from a convention center is a product opportunity I don't really see anywhere else. As far as bringing larger conventions here and using it for the spaces that they would use for an exhibit hall space, general session, possible overflow for seating, for food and beverage type of events. So that's a challenge. So that would be the one. Now, what I would say is there's another group that we've hired that was early on in this process, besides Johnson Consulting, that's the Pine Street Group. The reason that I engaged Pine Street Group, they're out of Seattle. The Seattle Convention Center, that was built on 8.2 acres, I believe, in downtown Seattle, that didn't exist to the eye when you looked at potential expansion opportunities. Now that's a much different animal in all honesty, but there was 21 different entities that came together to kind of free up those 8 acres. They came back and they built underground on the full 8 acres, and on 2 acres on each end cap of those, they ended up selling to pay for part of the project, one to a hotelier and one to residential for apartment complexes. So there is creative ways of looking at this. They moved streets. They put streets back in place in Seattle. So again, I tend to look at this from a, let's just get creative and shake out all the opportunities. And then as I look at these product opportunities, I'll speak to this too from the financial side. As you'll see in the projections and what the financial opportunities are, I just am a big believer, and I think this is an example of how we were able to get Boise Center East built. Continuing to do things that drive those either rates on the weekends or drive hotel tax dollars to the district allows us to do that walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. Because if we build something super expensive right out the gate, and we've got a great asset here with Boise Center that is successful, but again, if we came out of the gate and built a performing arts venue that maybe doesn't drive those heads and beds, we would then slow down the potential growth of that room night demand and that activity of bringing groups into town. So it's just something to consider as we go forward, and that's been something as an operator that I've always wanted to be mindful of, is what are the subsidy needs? What is it going to do to the hotel taxes in the future to make sure that we can sustain the growth and the opportunity for the district to continue to do and serve that great mission that we have per the statute, because it is very community driven. It is also got that kind of economic impact component, and I think you got to be able to tackle both, because if you just focus on one, you might go broke doing it. And so that's kind of how I've phased that, or like explained that to our board at times.
Well, and it's, yeah, I completely agree. It really is a sequencing. If you have something that's able to really tremendously grow your hotel tax base, that gives you additional funding resources, more than you have right now. So I think that's a critical point.
I'm Ray Kaufman. I thought we need to weigh in on this. We've got 3 downtown hotels. We've got an indoor sports arena right next door. We have a 7,000 square foot banquet hall, and we have a 200-car garage right next door. So I thought we should, I don't know that I have a question, but just some comments. I want to second what Clay Carley said, and that is, it would certainly be nice if we keep this development downtown. That's where it started. I was in on it in about 1989 when we started it. I've been on the fringes of this thing for many years. We had property we traded, we got it back, and so you know the history of a lot of that. I see by shaking your head that you know what was going on. A number of years ago, we commissioned a study for a performing arts venue, and I would say that we would support a performing arts venue or encourage you to look at a multi-use performing arts facility. The problem with a performing arts, it has a lot of dark days. So if it's a multi-purpose facility, that would make it even better. One thing I'm wondering about is we're talking about a 100,000 square foot expo hall. Do you know how big that is?
Yes, I do, to a certain degree, yes. And then you
You're
need your
over here
supporting space.
on the west, you're at 40,000 square feet, 49?
At the convention center on the west
Yeah.
building over there, yeah, it's about 89,000 square feet on 1.7 acres. So that's all
But just
rentable
the
space, not
ballroom,
back of
yeah.
house, everything.
That's huge.
So, yeah.
This is an enormous funding undertaking. So, but you know, I want to thank the district, the board for taking this study on, bringing this group in. It's certainly brought a lot of energy to us, I think, here in the downtown. And this valley is filling up with people. I think the growth is going to continue. So that's all. I don't. You can respond to what I've said, but that's all I can think of. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I'll just say that continues to kind of really just speak to the community we have here. The amount of individuals that have spoken up here about the community that we have. And again, I'm born and raised here, so it's a little close to the vest for me. But we want to do this right. And I know that about our district board right now is that we want to listen to the public. We want to make sure that we're taking, I'm a measure 5 times, cut once type of guy, and those that have worked with me know that. And that's going to be our process through this whole thing. But making sure that we continue to tap into what I'm hearing is there's a civic-minded interest from our business partners, our local leaders here, and I want to bring all of that energy together to see what we can do in something big that would really benefit the district and benefit our community here. So I'll just kind of add to that comment. We've got a couple minutes left. I know Kristen's going to make a couple comments, but a couple more questions. I think we've got about 5 minutes left, so. Go ahead, Kristen.
Well, I just kind of want to echo that sentiment. I mean, I think that, you know, Johnson Consulting echoed that downtown is, you know, kind of critical to keep the infrastructure and, you know, the walkability. And so I would say that I think everybody's in agreement that that's, you know, #1 priority. But again, you know, where do you put 100,000 square feet, right? So that's where we have to get creative and trying to think about the multi-use and trying to think about and talking to all the different partners. So that's, I think, what you guys also noted is that one of the advantages that Boise has is it's very community-minded, and the business people are very community-minded. So it's tapping into that and pooling our resources and all of our smart heads together to figure out how to tackle some of these problems, because we're going to have to be thinking 20 years down the road, right? We don't want to think 5 years down the road and be in the same spot. So this is a big undertaking. It's a big plan. It's where do we want to be in 20 years, and how can we all work together to achieve that?
Do you want to add anything?
I think that's, yeah, well put. That, yeah, I have nothing to add there.
Any other comments or questions from the public side or from the group here? Well, with that, we'll just say thank you, and I truly mean that. Many of you guys are very intricate part of this process as a whole. Oh, yep, sorry, talking into no microphone. Just say thank you for coming today. Again, as we continue this process, there are opportunities to continue to engage the district. I would just point to that future of the district part on our website. There's going to be a lot more information to come, and it kind of shows a timeline. Really, next up is a strategic plan update from the board side to then take a look at how we might execute on some of these product opportunities, and then continuing to engage those stakeholders. Just thank you for your time to Johnson Consulting's process, for your feedback, and again, I just heard it through and through. We have a very special community here, and we need to continue to make it that way. So I will continue to dedicate a lot of time and effort to protecting that. So thank you.
And if you're anything like me and you walk out of here and, you know, an hour down the road, you're thinking, God, I should have asked that question. We have a comment section on our website. So go to the future projects section of our website. And if you have something, put it in there. You can always, our emails are on the website. So email us, call us. We want to hear what you have to say, even if it's, you know, a week down the road and you said, gosh, I really wanted to say this, or this made me think of something. So please stay in contact. We will be communicating with you. Like Cody said, our next step as the board is to sit down together, because we haven't had a chance to sit down together after this study and really strategize and what are we going to tackle. And then we're going to let you guys know what we're going to be planning for the future for that. So just stay tuned, keep in contact, and let us know what comments and questions you have moving forward.